everybody. I'm Denise Natoli Brooks with Central State University Extension. I'm an Agriculture and Natural Resources Extension educator in Southeast Ohio, and tonight I'm in a gorgeous hayfield in Gallia County. We're looking at soil tonight, which is a resource that sometimes is forgotten. I've already taken a soil sample. You can learn about that in another segment. So I've got my soil in a bucket right here, ready to do some soil tests. I do, however, have a soil probe right here, which is another tool for soil testing. And I already put it in the ground to try to see if I can get a good soil sample. And look at that. Right there in the core, I've got about 8 inches of soil, which is what I want for a soil test. So pretty cool tool if you have the chance to use one. You can check it out, but the shovel worked just fine. I'm going to add this soil sample into my bucket. And what I'm looking for tonight is I'm looking for the texture, the feel of the soil. I want to know if it has clay in it, sand in it, silt in it. These are different sizes of pieces of soil or particles of soil. Sand's a pretty big particle. We know what that feels like. It's a gritty feel, right? Well, the silt's a little bit smaller and it has a velvety feel when it's on your hands. And clay, well, clay when it gets wet can get really sticky if you've ever done any pottery. Those are all textures or particles in the soil that together form that soil texture. So as I broke apart this soil sample, mixed it up really well, I want to take a simple jar. So a clear jar, this is just a clear mason jar. Want to fill it about 1/3 of the way with soil and the rest with water. We're actually going to do a jar test or a settling test. Now I told you that there's sand, silt, and clay. Which particle do you think is the heaviest and will end up on the bottom of the jar when it settles? The biggest or the smallest? The biggest. So we're looking to see the sand settle to the bottom, the silt in the middle, the clay on top, because we want to see how much of each we have. So this is a pretty simple at-home test to get us started thinking about our soil. I'm just going to fill up this jar with the soil. I'm going to remove these extra roots. I don't need them. But like I said, about 1/3 of the jar is going to be filled with soil. You can use a trowel if you have one. You can also just use your hand. All right, next is water. Nothing special about the water. We want to fill this jar to the top. Now, if there's a lot of clay in the soil or a lot of pieces of plant parts like roots, putting a little bit of dish soap, like a drop, in here can help let everything settle. It's not required, but it'll make things settle a little bit faster. All right, so we've got our jar filled with water. Next, to do the settling test, we have to find the lid to the jar to be able to shake it up, because that's what's going to tell us how everything settles. So with the jar lid on, you're just shaking this up. Everything's going to get mixed up. It's going to get really cloudy. And then you literally just leave this alone. 24 hours, sometimes 48 hours. Let everything settle out. Put it on a flat place, level, so all your layers come out nice and level. Then when you come back in 24 hours, 48 hours, whatever it takes, and the more clay you have in the soil, the more time it'll take, your finished jar test will look more like this. So you can see that this test, the water's still a little cloudy. There's probably still some clay left in it from the sample that was taken yesterday. But you actually have layers here. You can see layers that have settled out. The soil looks different at the bottom than it does at the top. This sample looks like the layers are, well, pretty thin at the top, so not much clay. A lot of silt in the middle here, maybe a little sand at the bottom. We can be more precise with measuring the amount of sand, silt, and clay on this test by just using a ruler. Simple ruler. When you put the ruler against the soil, you're measuring the depth of the soil from the top of it where it settled to the bottom. And then you're measuring the distance for each layer. That way we can come up with a percentage of how much sand, silt, and clay we have. Why does that matter? Why do we care how much sand, silt, or clay? Why do we care about texture? Because that helps us determine how well our soil will drain or hold water. That'll help us determine how easily our soil can get damaged by lots of people or equipment or animals walking on it, if it can get compacted, because we don't want that to happen. So a simple test like this gives us a few indicators about our soil texture. It's really just scratching the surface. You can actually use a neat tool called the soil triangle to figure out what type of soil you have just by the percentage of sand, silt, and clay in your jar test. I've got lines on this triangle that I'm following in the different directions of the numbers I mentioned, and where they cross, where they intersect, tells me my soil type, my texture. That's a pretty neat at-home simple test to do. How do I really find out if I got it right though? If I'm a good at-home soil scientist? Two good references and resources that I encourage everybody to check out. One is called the Web Soil Survey. This is a product online, free, and available through the USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Web Soil Survey. You can actually find your property and find a soil map. So this is a soil map I found of this exact hayfield. It tells me all about my soils. You can find that by searching Web Soil Survey online to dig in deeper, learn more about your soil. The other resource, which is a definite must for any landowner and land manager, is to take that soil sample that we have and send it off to a professional soil lab. They're going to analyze that soil. They're going to tell you about texture, but they're also going to tell you about all sorts of other things that you need to know if you want to take care of your soil, work with your soil, and have your soil work for you. So this is just a scratching the surface example of what you can do, but you may not appreciate soil yet, but try a jar test. You might appreciate your soil a little more, and you might take that next step to check out the Web Soil Survey and do a lab analysis as well. If you have any questions about your soil and learning more about it, make sure to contact Central State University Extension. Myself and Phil Hollingshead are your Southeast Ohio Extension educators, and we are happy to help you learn more about your soil. Now, we talked a bunch about soil, but let's talk about the plants that are growing on top of the soil. In the next segment, Phil Hollingshead's going to tell us more about the plants that depend on this soil to grow.